When I think about the interview between Vladimir Putin and Tucker Carlson from the perspective of just an everyday American, I think about how we really are in a moment where the world is changing. Now, when I saw this interview, my dad and I were sitting in the room, and I had recently moved back from Austin to be with my dad because he had a stroke and he's been recovering for the last 3 months. And I'm laying here in the bed while my dad's in the other bed watching this historic interview on a projector screen. We're both quiet, and I'm realizing the world has changed. And being 37 years old, looking at my dad who's 64 for the first time in his life, he's disabled. He had a major stroke. He was in the ICU and could have died. Looking at him, unable to fully communicate how he used to, and looking at Tucker Carlson interview Vladimir Putin, in that moment, I realized the world has changed. And that is what is the significance of this interview. Let me explain. So basically, the American hegemony or American dominance or America's leadership position where they get their way and able to police the world is on the first steps of showing significant decline. And this interview by Vladimir Putin is proof of this. For all of our modern history, when I say modern, I'm talking about in the last 20, 30 years, our understanding of Russia and Vladimir Putin has come through the lens of American propaganda. We didn't know who this man is. We didn't really know if he even jokes around. We thought he was just an ex-KGB agent ready to take over the world with imperialist aims. But in this interview, what I saw is a man who was at war and was realizing that he wanted a war to stop. I saw a man that's politically savvy and realizes that we're in a new paradigm. We're in a new age where he understands that the media industrial complex no longer have a chokehold over the everyday citizen. He understood that there has been propaganda for all 24 to 30 years of his presidency running Russia. And the only way he could stop this war, the Ukraine war, is to reach out to the American people and the world and show a different side of himself for the first time. Now, a lot of people might believe he's doing this because he's trying to manipulate America, but I think America is looking at this from the wrong perspective. And let me tell you why. First, there was the Ukraine war that kicked off. Then in 2023, toward the end, the Palestine-Israel conflict kicked off. By the time the Palestine-Israel conflict kicked off, many of us stopped even paying attention to the Ukraine war. What people don't realize is Russia's been at war basically with itself. It's really a civil war in Putin's eyes for almost an entire year. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have died. Thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Russians have died. So collectively, Putin, at least at minimum, have lost over 500,000 of his own people. And so people might be wondering, why will he come on a television show? Why will he open up candidly to Tucker Carlson for the first time? Because he wants to stop the possibility of a world war. He's already been in a war. He's already currently in a war where Russian people are dying, and he considers Ukraine and Ukrainian people Russians as well. And he wants this war to stop. And he saw this as an opportunity to talk to the American people and be honest and open about how he believes he's doing a righteous war, how he sees the Russian position in the world. And he wants Americans and other people in the world to see him as a normal human being. He's not trying to project strength like he did at the beginning when he took over basically Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. And he understands, if you listen to the things he was saying in these interviews, that the world has changed when it comes to media. He knows that people are listening to alternative media. He knows that people are skeptical of the major media outlets. That's why he chose Tucker Carlson. That's why he gave big props to Elon Musk. And he is so sophisticated compared to Biden currently, far as understanding politics, that he was able to agree to this interview. And I believe he only agreed to this interview because he's at war and people are underestimating the stakes that are at stake. And he understands those stakes. He understands that if he's at a war and America continues to support this war for any longer or try to escalate this war, it could mean a world war. And I think a lot of Americans are underestimating this. That's why you see a change of behavior of Vladimir Putin. He understands what's at stake. He's experiencing his own people in this civil war that he considers dying, and he wants it to stop. And he's willing to step outside of his usual projection of power and mystery to do so. And so what I saw in this interview, it's a man who's deeply connected to Russia, who understands their history. And another thing, this is a critique of our political system that I notice, is his deep knowledge of politics and how the world politics over time affect Russia and affect what's going on around him. And one of the reasons that he's able to do that, because he's been in power for almost 24 years. And if you look at our political system, where basically politicians and leaders only can stay in power for 8 years, and they're spending 2 to 3 of those years basically gearing up to get reelected, that they're not able to gain this deep domain knowledge, this deep connection to them trying to execute a long-term vision. And I saw an advantage in Russia, an advantage in systems where leaders get to stay the course for long periods of time. Their identity, their soul becomes the country they represent because they had enough time to manifest with the country as the leader. And that's what I saw in Vladimir Putin. I saw a man who deeply loves Russia, understands Russia, and understands all the politics throughout history associated with Russia. And I don't think you can get that type of connection and understanding without being able to stay in power successively for at least 10 to 15 years. And he's been able to do that for roughly almost 24 years. And so that is something that in the future, even though democracy is great, that in the future, we may have to consider that these constant elections on the local, the mid, and the executive level is a distraction for the American people. But it's also a distraction for the people who are running our country and leading us in this civic duty when they don't have enough time to actually learn the job, love the job, associate their identity with the job, and turn off the selling and politicking and focus on what they're trying to achieve for us long term. And I saw the way he was able to talk about Russia in such a knowledgeable way. It really hit me when I look at the average politician in America, when they're constantly doing slogans and cheap little, basically grifts to try to get your vote. And I say, honestly, if Biden had to do a 2-hour interview, and I think Putin actually challenged him to that, would he be able to speak so eloquently? Would he be able to give you a robust history that's connected to all of the world and how it's associated with America over time? I don't think Biden will be able to do this even when he was 50 years old, not to the level that Putin did it. So what Putin has done was a successful campaign, a successful appeal to U.S. electorate, because this interview wasn't really targeted at U.S. leaders. It was targeted at everyday American citizens. Now, my personal opinion is Putin is a very talented politician. He knew that elections coming up. He knows that we don't have faith in Biden. He knows that potentially Trump may win. He knows that Trump is somebody who wants to be loved and looking to do alternative things. And he used this time, the strategic time, to open up and do something outside the norm to get us talking about basically Ukraine, Russia, and our relationship. He knows it's a critical time to do this, and he did it, and I think he was successful. And if Trump wins or another candidate other than Biden wins, the electorate is going to be leaning toward basically normalizing or trying to de-escalate basically tensions with Russia. So I think that Vladimir Putin was extremely successful at this. Now, I don't want you to underestimate, in my personal opinion, how politically savvy Vladimir Putin is. Because in my opinion, even the Ukraine war was kicked off strategically by Vladimir Putin, because when that pandemic happened and we spent $9 to $10 trillion and we're running around worrying about vaccines, he knew this was the right time when our basically power was off balance to go ahead and make his move and push back on Ukraine and the expansion of NATO. So every move of the way, this politically savvy tacticianer has made the better chess moves than our leaders and government officials. So this interview represents a paradigm shift. Barbara Walters, many years ago, went and interviewed Fidel Castro, even though the State Department did not want her to. And then that interview ended up going down as a historic interview. This same interview by Tucker Carlson will go down as a historic interview, because I think that is wrecking time. If America do not make the right moves and get the right leaders in office, leaders who are somewhat young, who understands the future we're moving into, both politically, socially, and technologically, then American hegemony will end up being the end and the downfall for America. We will never be, or we will no longer be, the number one country in the world moving forward in the next 50 years. And I think that if we don't get the right leadership that understands the people, that understands the world we're moving into, then we can be in trouble, and we might have to take a backseat to China. So I think that this interview is very, very important. I think Americans need to start paying attention, not to just the Ukraine war, not just to Gaza and Israel, but everything we're doing around the world and what our leaders are talking about in the White House. The truth is, every 70 years, there's a generational transitional structure to the world where a certain age group spent their whole lives gaining power and influence and then trying to execute their plans. The problem is when technological shifts happen where the rest of the world start catching up economically because technology allows it, then the power structure of the world starts to reshape. That's what's happening now. All the investments, all the inventions, all the technological evolution that America enjoyed to become this rich nation has become commoditized and cheap and slowly trickled to the rest of the world. And the rest of the world are using those technologies to finally catch up. They're not catching up to us in the sense that they're at the same level as us. It's the fact is that the reason we were dominating is because we were so ahead of them that it made it look like everybody else was poor. So it's not the fact that we're declining. It's that everybody else is coming up higher than where they were. So proportionally, it looks like we're declining, but the reality is just the rest of the world is catching up. And so that's what's happening in the world. That's the significance of this interview. And I think that young people, 18 all the way to 35, need to get interested in politics at this point, because the truth is, if you sit back and take a back seat, the old power players who are going into retirement, who are going to die, who are only interested in their legacy that they worked their whole life for, will throw away your future. And so that's my takeaway when it comes to the interview with Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin. Thank you for your time.